morning, and thank you for joining me on the Path to Liberty. It's Wednesday, January 27th, 2021, and on this episode, I've got a big news update from the nullification movement. Things are really just getting started here for the year, and we're already tracking efforts to nullify federal attacks on the Second Amendment in 9 states, and we should see a lot more efforts in the coming weeks. So I'm going to do a very brief introduction on the strategy that we use, which I covered in more detail in an episode near the end of last year. And then I'm going to cover what we're watching so far with some big news in Missouri, specifically yesterday and hopefully tomorrow as well. And then if I have time, if I don't go too long, I'm also going to give an update on efforts to pass permitless carry or expand on them. Some people call it constitutional carry, and even the steps that you should be taking to support these efforts, to understand that whole process, because that's more important than ever, is to understand how the grassroots makes things move on a state or a local level, forgetting that the 202 area code even exists, because it will never limit its own power. First of all, before getting to that, my name is Michael Bolden. We broadcast live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. Our show homepage has everything you need to follow this program, all the archives for 2.5+ years. On individual episodes, I include a bunch of links and references to other articles, source documents. In even previous episodes, I got a bunch of all of that today so you can read and learn more and take action on your own time, because I'm really just scratching the surface. You can find all the platforms we're on, and I'm going to mention some of them because I want you to know where we are, so as soon as we're booted from one of the mainstream ones like Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, etc. As soon as we're off one of those, you can know where to jump in and find us or start following us there as well. We're on Gab TV, so tv.gab.com/10th Amendment Center. We just started our MeWe page yesterday. We're on Odyssey and Library.tv, BitChute, and BitTube. We've been having problems getting videos to process on BitChute for some reason, but we're going to keep uploading as much as we can on all those platforms. And of course, we're on the audio-only podcast editions at Apple, Podbean, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and the rest. All that and more, including our membership program where you can put your financial faith behind our work to stand up for the Constitution and liberty for as little as $2 a month. 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty is the show homepage. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. And while we wait another minute or so for the people getting live notifications to join us on the live show, I want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat. I really appreciate you being here, whether it's your first time or you've been here for every episode since day one. There's Marcus, Tim Martin in Arizona, Clay Kent, Tyler B. Hope you're doing well, Tyler. Lawrence, MRGF, DL Neal, Dan Reed, Leslie G., Alan Mosley. Awesome. Good to see you, buddy. I appreciate Alan, you are just a pretty cool dude. Anyways, Blue North Wind, Michael Sawyer, Erwin Haverneck in Omaha, and we've got a report from Nebraska, Erwin, so hopefully you're staying tuned for that as well. I'll look back at the chat a little bit later, and depends if I go really long or not. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible later in the show, or I'll reply to some select comments a little bit later today. You can also email me at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. So let's get into this. We want to nullify federal gun control, and if we follow the view of the founders and the ratifiers, primarily the ratifiers, because if we understand the legal meaning of the Constitution, James Madison himself told us that the opinions of the people in Philadelphia, they mean nothing. The Constitution in and of itself, just based off of that, is a dead letter. This is Madison himself, the father of the Constitution. What breathes life into it, what gives it the legal force, are the people who approved it during the ratification debates in 1787 and 1788. So it's a people of the several states, because we're talking about the sovereign people of the several states. And if we understand the original legal meaning, the number of federal gun control measures that are authorized by the Constitution, and then the Second Amendment added to really hammer it home, is 0. So not one. And that means everything from the National Firearms Act of 1934 to the Gun Control Act of 1968, its amendments in 1986. the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, which I only learned about a few years ago, which is just amazing to me. This is another NRA-supported and passed piece of federal gun control legislation attacking the idea of, well, in 1988, I don't think they were looking at 3D printing, but that's how it's being applied today. They want to actually stop people from having guns that are undetectable. But if we took the view of the founders, the approach of the old revolutionaries, all guns would be undetectable to the government. Anyways, so all of it is unconstitutional. Bump stock ban and everything in between. So we need to do something on the state and local level, following the founders' advice on how to defeat those federal programs. We primarily use James Madison's strategy in Federalist number 46, where he advised a refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union. His words, not mine. A refusal to cooperate with officers of the Union, and even using what he called legislative devices to implement this type of thing. I covered this in some detail in an episode just before Christmas last year. James Madison, How to Defeat Federal Programs. It was basically for the anniversary of the passage of the Virginia Resolutions of 1798 in response to the hated Alien and Sedition Acts of that year. So I covered that in some detail, and you can learn about that a little bit more by checking that out. I will link to it in the show notes. Then just one quick point here. In Federalist 46, Madison told us that this was not only the way to defeat federal programs, this refusal to cooperate, rather than going to the federal government to limit its own power or just hoping that new people will limit their own power or give that up. He said if a number of states did this, it would be a very powerful approach. Here's how he put it. He says, were the sentiments of several adjoining states happen to be in union, it would present obstructions which the federal government would hardly be willing to encounter. This was at a time when the federal government was going to be so tiny we wouldn't even recognize what it is today in comparison today. Tiny, doing almost nothing. Certainly they were expanding the power of the central government or the federal government over what they had previously, but nothing. Like, there is no comparison to the largest government in the history of the planet, which is what we have right now. And he said, even at that point, the federal government would not be able to deal with states that did not participate and help out. Now, this isn't just some arcane political theory thrown down the memory hole. It's actually been supported by the Supreme Court. Now, we don't base nullification efforts, our efforts to stand up for the Constitution and liberty, on approval from the Supreme Court. We need to do this whether the Supreme Court agrees with us or not. We have to stand up for what is right, no matter what the Supreme Court, no matter what the government happens to say in Washington, D.C., or any of their branches or their bureaucrats and the like. It has to be done. But when the Supreme Court backs you up, it makes it a lot easier, or a lot less difficult. It's definitely, there's no ease in this, because there's friendly quarters that absolutely hate this as well as much as the opposition. In fact, the friendly opposition, so-called friendly opposition, is probably more dangerous because it's more effective at killing this type of effort. So here is something called the Anti-Commandeering Doctrine. This is where the Supreme Court took James Madison's advice, a refusal to cooperate with officers of union, and basically held it as a doctrine called Anti-Commandeering Doctrine over a period of 150 plus years in 5 cases, or 5 cases from 1842. The most recent was 2018. In essence, what they say is no matter what the federal government does, it doesn't matter what it is, they cannot require states or their political subdivisions, that's local communities, local governments, to use any manpower or resources to help implement, enforce, or effectuate a federal program. So that includes all the federal gun control. And I covered that in some detail as well just a few weeks ago. I've done this on a number of episodes, anti-commandeering the top 6 questions. I hope you check that out soon. And here, for example, the most recent case was in Murphy versus NCAA. This was a sports wagering case in 2018. And this is what Samuel Alito had to say. He said, the anti-commandeering doctrine may sound arcane. It's outdated, just no one knows about it. He says, but it is simply the expression of a fundamental structural decision incorporated into the Constitution. The decision to withhold from Congress the power to issue orders directly to the states. Conspicuously absent from the list of powers given to Congress is the power to issue direct orders to the governments of the states. If we look at the Constitution as a set of limited delegated powers, there is nothing in there that says that they can order the states around. He says the Anti-Commandeering Doctrine simply represents the recognition of this limit on congressional authority. And this is the really juicy part from that case. I'm no fan of any of these Supreme Court justices. I think they're all bad in one way or another. He says, that Congress can't take any action that, quote, dictates what a state legislature may and may not do, even when the state action conflicts with federal law. And Alito put it this way: a more direct affront to state sovereignty is not easy to imagine. So even if you have, for example, a state like here in California legalizing a plant that all branches of the federal government, the executive, Congress, and the judicial branch have all said that they can't have legal. Well, it doesn't matter. The federal government can't require them to participate in the enforcement of it. And so now we need to apply this, and we've been actually pushing for this for many, many years. It's a big learning curve in some areas, but we've been pushing for this in many years. We need to apply this on the right to keep and bear arms, because it is actually a very, very, again, less difficult situation. Here's a couple of facts when it comes to federal gun control. I've already gone through a number of the federal gun control measures that are on the books that shouldn't exist. But first of all, we know that the ATF shouldn't exist. The only thing that they should do under the Constitution, the only thing they're authorized to do is disband. That's not going to happen. But we also recognize that the ATF in and of itself has an Achilles heel, and that is a resource problem. The Imperial, I could call them the Imperial stormtroopers that make up the ATF, there's only about 5,000, maybe it peaks around 6,000 employees for the entire country. It's about 5,500, I think, today. About a third of them are in administration. The rest of them are enforcement agents. So my government school math is pretty bad, and I always point this out. Let me pull up a calculator. Let's say 5,500 times 0.67. We're like 3,600 enforcement agents for all 50 states. And we know that with any type of entity that requires on-person power to do a job, there's certain limits to how many hours a day, how many hours a year that they're going to work. And consistently, year in, year out, administration in, administration out, every single year, the ATF has a maximum capacity of closing somewhere between 8 and 10,000-ish, give or take, cases per year. That's a lot of people having their rights violated. That's a lot of people that are getting thrown in cages and prosecuted for violating federal acts that shouldn't exist in the first place, gun laws, that is, gun restrictions. But it's 8 to 10,000. Let's put this into perspective. Think of it this way. If there were 10 or 11 million undocumented short-barreled shotguns in violation of the National Firearms Act of 1934, and they only have a capacity of 10,000 cases, the percentage of people that they can actually enforce or prosecute, and this is with state and local help, is very low. So if you withdraw the state and local support, it becomes almost nothing. In 2013, the National Governors Association told us, and they were concerned during one of these fake so-called federal shutdowns, they were concerned about this because, in their words, states are partners with the federal government on most federal programs. And you and I both know that partnerships don't work too well when half the team quits. They just hope that we don't know this. Judge Andrew Napolitano specifically talked about this type of legislation a couple of administrations ago when we were getting a lot of support for it. Unfortunately, friendly fire from groups like the NRA, and that is a pun intended. The NRA absolutely hates this kind of stuff. If you want to know why, maybe email me, or if I get a chance, I'll talk about it later. But they're terrible on this. They hate stuff that opposes the federal gun control measures that they mostly supported. But we're going to keep doing it no matter what they want or what anybody wants, whether every town or whatever. We're going to keep pushing to undermine, reject, and resist and nullify these unconstitutional federal acts. Now, here's how Judge Knapp summed it up. I will link to this in the show notes so you can actually listen to the audio and read through some of the text of it as well. He put it this way: the federal government does not have the person, power, and resources to enforce all federal laws on its own. This is just pretty obvious at this point, or it should be. He says it needs the assistance of state and local police as well. They don't have that in Washington and Colorado because marijuana is lawful there. This is pretty early on. So it might be impractical and too costly for the feds to enforce there. He goes further. He says, our home state of New Jersey could not, for example. Now, we don't expect to see this in New Jersey, but it's an interesting thought experiment. He says they could not use the police to frustrate federal law enforcement. In practice, under the status quo, if they try to do that, they're going to lose every single time because all the state courts are going to work with the federal courts, and it's just a bad strategy. I should have actually come up with a link to another episode where I've covered this, but just trust me when, well, don't trust me. Look into it a little bit yourself. He says, our home state of New Jersey could not, for example, use the police to frustrate federal law enforcement. But what it could say to state and local police is, you will not cooperate. That will make federal enforcement of tighter federal gun laws nearly impossible. And mind you, I want it to be 100% impossible, but compared to where we are today and where things might be in the next 1 to 4 years, we should expect to see much more being pushed at us in the near future, even though in the last 4 years we had record numbers of federal gun control enforcement. I expect that to be the new baseline, and it's going to grow from there, and new efforts to add new restrictions as well. So nearly impossible to enforce is a huge step forward, no matter what we're talking about. And of course, I covered the entire strategy in more detail in November in this episode, Second Amendment Preservation Foundation to Nullify Federal Gun Control. Please check that out. I will link to it in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. And now for the news. And I'm just going to do a kind of a rapid fire again. All my puns are intended. A little rapid fire of what's going on. You may have heard that yesterday a piece of legislation was passed or moved forward in the great state of Missouri, the Show Me State. And let me read about this. Now, it's not finally passed, and I'll get to the process here in a moment. State Senator Eric Burleson of Battlefield, what a great name, filed Senate Bill 39, SB 39, on December 1st. Titled the Second Amendment Preservation Act. The legislation would ban any entity or person, including any public officer or employee of the state and its political subdivisions, from enforcing any past, present, or future federal acts. So all of them on the books already, and all of them that might come on the books in the future. Any acts, laws, executive orders, administrative orders, court orders, rules, regulations, statutes, or ordinances, and that is a direct quote covering all of that infringe on the right to keep and bear arms. It actually gives a list of some of those things. It actually adds a definition, so it isn't just a feel-good measure. They specifically list things such as taxes and fees on firearms, accessories, or ammunition, registration and tracking schemes, any act forbidding the possession, ownership, or use or transfer of a firearm accessory, or ammunition by law-abiding citizens, any act ordering the confiscation of firearm accessories or ammunition, etc. So it's a pretty broad thing, and this would actually cover those things like the NFA, the bump stock ban, red flag laws, Gun Control Act of 1968, and the rest. Of course, we have to see how it plays out, how Missouri actually takes a stand should they pass this, but this is a very strong foundational first step to get the ball rolling. It is far. The best time to have gotten this started would have been in 1934. The second best time to get it started is right now. Whatever day it is, whatever day you're watching or listening to this, whether it's today or 10 years in the future, the best day to nullify federal gun control is today. Now, it was given a hearing pretty fast. We've seen this legislation introduced and supported. Great people like Ron Calzone with Missouri First, MOFirst.org, have been working tirelessly on this for years. Dave Rowland and others. And this is the fastest we've ever seen this taken up. We've been told that the Speaker of the House, on the House side, there's another bill, HB 85, that should be getting a committee vote tomorrow. This is one of the Speaker of the House's priority bills. So unless there is opposition from friendly quarters, this is going to get passed, and it is going to get signed into law. But it's going to take a lot of work because we expect a lot of friendly opposition. So yesterday, the first committee in the Senate, the Senate General Laws Committee took up the bill. They had a hearing on it last week. It's a two-step process. You have to have a hearing in Missouri, and then a week or 4 weeks or 5 weeks later, they schedule it for an executive session. In the past, they've generally waited after the session started in Missouri, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks, 7 weeks. They push it down the line, and they wait, and they wait, and they wait, and they finally have a hearing. And then once it has a hearing, then they sit on it and wait to the last minute before they schedule a vote. And by the time it actually gets that vote and gets a chance to go to the Senate floor or the House floor, the clock runs out. So they play a waiting game. But this year, for whatever reason, I wonder why, I don't care if it's partisan, they're actually moving fast. And so they had a hearing last week, and 7 days later, they held the executive session. And yesterday, they gave it a do-pass recommendation with a 5-to-1 vote. One person was absent. I think it was a party line thing. I'm assuming. I haven't seen who it was. The similar bill on the House side from Representative Jeff Pogue. It's co-sponsored by a couple of dozen representatives at least so far, and the Speaker of the House. That is up for a committee hearing and vote. Well, it already had its hearing. Literally, they're doing this in a 2-day process. It had its first hearing yesterday, and now it's not even going to wait a week. They're doing another hearing and an executive session, not a hearing, but having an executive session and a vote on it tomorrow. So this is really moving fast. When you get the Speaker of the House saying, this is one of my top priority bills, you're going to see a lot of things happen. You can see the full, if you're watching on the screen here, I'm scrolling through. There's Rob Vescovo and Tony Lavasco. I appreciate Lavasco retweeting and sharing this stuff. Ron Hicks as well. But you can see all the people who are sponsoring and co-sponsoring this bill on the House side from, it's not Pogue, it's Jared Taylor. So that's going to get a vote tomorrow in the General Laws Committee on the House side. So just a quick point that this is just the first step. I see people pointing and posting on this and tweeting at me saying, oh, I heard yesterday Missouri nullified all gun control. No. This was one vote. It first has to get a hearing, then it has an executive session, then it goes to a calendar committee, which has to consider whether it's proper to be scheduled on the Senate floor. So then it goes through that. That's step 3. Step 4 is a debate, possible amendments filed, then a second reading and a second vote, then a third reading and a third vote. And once it goes through all that, then it has to repeat the process on the other side. And part of the reason I think strategically that they do the same bill on both sides, specifically in Missouri, in some places like Tennessee, you have to have companion bills is what they call it. But in Missouri specifically, I think they do this because they're saying, well, look, we already passed this. Let's just, they're either going to combine, they can maybe do a parliamentary move or something like that where they combine the two bills. They've already gone through the whole hearing process. And as long as no one comes in and says, well, this legal term needs to have a comma after it or a colon, they'll add these very tiny legal amendments to it to slow down the process. And that generally comes from the NRA-type lawyers out there who don't like the fact that we're going to be opposing all the stuff that they supported over the years. That's my belief. We've had this happen for many, many years, and we've seen it happen almost every time. So the only thing standing in the way of getting this passed in Missouri and Texas, Nebraska, and elsewhere is really going to be opposition from friendly quarters, because otherwise I think it's clear sailing. Here's another bill in South Carolina. Representative Stuart Jones from Lawrence filed House Bill 3042 in December. The bill would prohibit, this is a smaller step forward, but is a good line in the sand. It would prohibit enforcement of any new federal gun control. It sets the stage. It's been very difficult to get things done in South Carolina. I don't know, the establishment on one side really doesn't like standing for the Constitution, even though they pretend to. But the bill would prohibit enforcement of future federal gun control by banning any personnel or property of this state or any political subdivision of the state from enforcing any federal, state, or local act, law, order, rule, ordinance, or regulation which restricts an individual's constitutional right, I don't like that phrase, individuals' natural right to keep and bear arms, enacted after January 2021. That's one bill that would set a line in the sand on anything new, which is a good start. Once you do that and you show that the world doesn't end, then you have to follow up and expand it from there. We see this happen on cannabis all the time. We see this happen on immigration sanctuary cities. They take small steps and they keep expanding. Why not use the same process for the right to keep and bear arms? I don't know why the hell this hasn't happened so far. Are people wimps? I don't know. It's time to make a stand for the Constitution, no matter what anybody tells us to do. Here's Representative Doug Gilliam from Buffalo, South Carolina, I'm not sure if that's a typo, but maybe there is a Buffalo, also filed House Bill 3119 in December. It would prohibit the enforcement of what is defined as illegal gun laws by anyone working in the state, which it defines to be as any federal, state, or local act, order, rule, or ordinance or regulations which restricts the individual's right to keep and bear arms. And it does give a list to actually define. There's 7 points in that legislation, similar to what they do in Missouri. It's not the exact type of legislation, but it's got a similar process: tax, levy, fee, or stamp, registration or tracking, any act forbidding the possession or ownership, ordering confiscation, etc. So things like red flag laws, bump stock bans, National Firearms Act, and the like. That's in South Carolina, House Bill 3042 and House Bill 3119. They've both been assigned to the House Judiciary Committee, which has an establishment gatekeeper as the chair and has always resisted anything positive from a 10th Amendment approach, but maybe there will be enough grassroots pressure to push that through. In Nebraska, Senator Steve Halloran introduced Legislative Bill LB 188 earlier this month. This is also called the Second Amendment Preservation Act. It's basically the same type of bill as in Missouri. They add some interesting punishments in here as well. It would bar any, and I think this also might be in the Missouri legislation. I have to double check so I'm not kind of crossing the streams from previous legislation that we've seen in previous legislative sessions. But in Nebraska, this law would bar any Nebraska government entity from utilizing assets, state funds, or funds allocated by the state to engage in any activity that aids a federal agency, federal agent, or corporation providing services to the federal government in the enforcement of any of those federal gun control measures. And check this out. State or local agents guilty of violating the act would be subject to civil penalties of up to $3,000 on the first offense and a Class 1 misdemeanor charge on the second. Local governments, so if local governments decide to say, well, hell with you, state capital, we're going to do our own thing. But if local governments violate this, people can file some kind of a motion and have it challenged, and local governments or agencies found guilty of violating this, in other words, helping the federal government, whether it's through joint task forces or whatever, enforce federal gun control measures, would lose grant funds in the following fiscal year. It has to be some kind of teeth involved. We don't necessarily need to have a standoff with federal agents because with only a few thousand employees, they can't do what they want us to think that they can do without the support of the states. We certainly see this playing out that way on both cannabis and immigration. We absolutely can see the same thing on the right to keep and bear arms when the gun rights community decides that enough is enough. Here in Texas, not here in Texas, next legislation is in Texas from Matt Krause. I covered this, or it's Krause, in Fort Worth. I covered this in December or November's episode briefly because it was pre-filed pretty early. House Bill 635. This bill would prohibit state agencies and law enforcement officers from having contract with or in any other, and I'm quoting from the bill, any other manner provide assistance to a federal agency or official with respect to the enforcement of a federal statute, order, rule, or regulation purporting to regulate a firearm, firearm accessory, or firearm ammunition if the statute, order, rule, or regulation imposes a prohibition, restriction, or other regulation that does not exist under the laws of the state. Now, I know some people tell me, like, well, the state laws are bad too. Absolutely. 100%. But this is the first step in the process. This is actually a much cleaner piece of legislation than some of the others that I watch because it's very, very straightforward. There is no question about what is prohibited. So there is never going to be a debate. Basically, if it's not on the books in Texas statute, they cannot participate. And that is the starting point for Texas. House Bill 635. My understanding, and I should just spill the beans, hell with it, back when he was the AG, this text was actually drafted by Governor Abbott. So hopefully he's not controlled opposition and he's going to do the right thing and support this. We will see, because really what moves in Texas, it gets kind of down to the Speaker of the House and the governor. They have a lot of power over what's going to go forward. We'll find out. So again, it's up to the supposed people on our side that are supposedly going to support the right to keep and bear arms in Texas and protect the state from federal attacks, which have been happening for a long time and we know is going to continue and ramp up. So it's up to them. If they can get this bill scheduled for hearings and votes and floor votes, etc., it will sail through, because I know once it gets the attention, people will just say, well, why are we helping the federal government attack our rights? And then once you get that passed, the follow-up has to be, well, it's pretty obvious who the problem is here. Because if we're not helping the feds, and the feds don't have the manpower to do this, they may try to attack. Now, mind you, as this effort grows, should it ever actually really take off the way it should, I've got a bunch of episodes I could talk about how this plays out, how the caged tiger that is the empire will attack. It is a certain strategic situation that we're facing, and we got to have a lot of backbone on this. But if anyone's going to have backbone, I would think it would be gun rights supporters, gun owners, or people like me who don't even own a firearm, who are actually just on board with you having the right to do what's best for you, your family, your property, and your country. So this is the first step. Once it passes, of course, in Texas, it'll be obvious where the problem is. And then you can focus all the effort where it's a little less difficult, which is on state restrictions on the right to keep and bear arms. Now, here's a few bills that I actually haven't read in detail, so I don't know. I want to thank our good friend and supporter, EHP Training, down in Alabama, who's been working hard over the past few years to get this bill introduced. House Bill 157, Second Amendment Preservation Act in Alabama. That's going to go to the House Committee on Public Safety and Homeland Security sometime next week. You gotta get in support of that bill, House Bill 157. When I say I haven't read through this, I've scanned through them. But sometimes the language has little changes here and there, and it can have an impact of how it might play out in practice. All these I've looked through, and they have good general foundational basics in them. They might need more improvement than the previous bills that I've reported on, but I'm not ready to actually be able to say in detail what's what. In Mississippi, similar piece of legislation, Senate Bill 2564 from Senator Melanie Sojourner. It's an act to provide that the Comprehensive Firearms Code of the state of Mississippi, this is pretty cool how they describe the bill. The Comprehensive Firearms Code of the state of Mississippi is interposed in place of any federal law confiscating firearms of law-abiding citizens and for related purposes. I want to mention again, I don't like the use of the phrase law-abiding citizens. I know this is big in the gun community, but it's actually a bad choice, because as soon as they make something illegal, if you carry that firearm, you're no longer a law-abiding citizen. So that can be problematic. We gotta get away from this worship of following laws that shouldn't exist. So that's in Mississippi. We've got Arizona Senate Bill 1328. I know there's another bill on the House side, but I'm not really a fan. I think it's House Bill 2111. It's more like in practice, it's more like a resolution. This one seems to be a little bit better. I'll look into it a little bit more. It's got 8 sponsors, Senator Gowan and a number of other people like Bartow and Borelli, people who have supported this type of legislation in previous years but didn't get it passed. Arizona Senate Bill 1328. In Oklahoma, Senator Dom filed a similar bill that will be formally introduced and go to committee next week, Senate Bill 486. And in Arkansas, and this one is it's a pretty long piece of legislation, but I've seen a couple of really good pieces. This is from Senator Bob Ballinger, who sent it to us, I believe, maybe a few weeks ago. Senate Bill 59. Hopefully we'll have a report on that in the near future. Now, I did mention, and I know I'm running a little bit long, so I'm not going to cover the carry bills. We know that yesterday in Utah, the House expanded permitless carry by a big vote, 54-19. There's also legislation from Gary Marbut and the Montana Shooting Sport Association, House Bill 102, to also expand it. I know there's kind of an amendment process there, so if you want to follow what's going on in Montana, follow Gary Marbut and his great, Gary's one of the best people in the country for state. Gary, Ron Calzone, and a few other people are some of the people to really follow how they approach this. Their tireless effort, working with legislators, working with the legislation, and pushing this forward, sending out tons of emails and doing tons of updates. They really have it down. So if you want to understand how to do the activism, follow those two dudes. They are amazing and tireless in their work, and we should be very grateful for them. So House Bill 102, Georgia, HB 2, South Carolina, House Bill 3096. There's 4 bills in Indiana. Texas, I think there's a couple of constitutional carry or permitless carry, which is a better term. House Bill 821, 1238. Alabama, SB 5. Florida, House Bill 123, and I think 6001. But anyways, I'll try to link to some of these in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Now, here's what you do. If you live in any of these states, what you need to do is get the bill number. Then you go to this link that I've got pulled up on the screen that I will include in the show notes. It's openstates.org there. Find your legislator tool. This is for state legislators. We are not contacting our governor. We're not tweeting at our governor. In some places, maybe like Texas, having the governor get on board on this and talking about it is really good, but that's not our primary move. We need to contact state senators, state representatives, ask them to co-sponsor. We can look up who they are. Very simply, this only pulls up our state legislators. If you pull it up and you enter your address, it's going to tell you who it is. You click on them. I did not enter my address, but this is south of downtown LA. Reginald Brian Jones Sawyer, who actually introduced a piece of legislation a couple of years ago to ban the state from participating in the enforcement of federal marijuana prohibition. It didn't win, but he was using this exact same approach. So then you're going to find the contact information. A lot of people want to send an email. Emails are a lot easier to ignore. What you really should do is pick up the phone and make a phone call and just say, whoever you talk to, hi, my name is so-and-so. Be courteous. It doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is, a lot of times, even when these people are horrible, that's redundant. Politicians in general are bad. We shouldn't trust any of them. They're really not in favor of liberty. They want to be in government because they like power in most situations. So it's very easy to be pissed off at these people. I have disdain for almost all of them. So I look at them and I want to talk to them. I'm like, oh, you are a gross. I would never have a drink with you. I would never hang out with you. If you showed up at my home, I would ask you to leave. That's my mentality for almost every politician. So you have to set that aside. If you're like me at all and you think they're all disgusting, set it aside, just pick it up and think like a salesperson, because what you want is to nullify federal gun control. And so you call them and you say, whoever you're talking to, you treat them like a human being. Treat them like you would want to be treated. Say, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I wanted to talk to the representative about supporting some legislation. Is that something I can talk to him or her about, or should I leave a message? Whatever, just follow through and say, this is the bill number. This is the bill number. For example, in Missouri, it's Senate Bill 39. You call your state senator. Are you co-sponsoring this? I did not see you on the link as being a co-sponsor. Can you please do that? I live in your district and I'd like to see this happen. Now, we've heard from people over the years that, like, for example, when the bailouts happened in 2008, the calls to Washington, D.C. against this were like 100 to 1 or 1,000 to 1. It was like huge numbers against. And it didn't make a difference. The switchboard gets overloaded. It doesn't matter. But on a state level, especially in some smaller districts, as little as 5 or 10 calls will at least open their eyes and at least get them talking about it. Now, if you're pretty certain that the person is not going to support it, maybe look what committee it is. And so, for example, here, we know that House Bill 85, I'm going to go back to Missouri and pull this up. When you pull up the bill, and all these bills will be linked in the show notes at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. So it takes a little clicking through. What's the bill in my state? Well, here, HB 85, it says it's in the General Laws Committee. I click on the General Laws Committee, and I can see the chair of that committee. I can click on Curtis Trent and say, what's his contact? Well, I'm sure somewhere on there, biography. Maybe if I expand it, but we're going to have to find the contact information for this dude. Maybe we got to look at it. Capital address. There it is. Phone number. 573 whatever. It's published. It's public. You could call, and you know who the assistant is in Missouri. You call and say, I want to see this bill pass. I know it's up for hearing. Thank you for scheduling it for hearing. You're the chairman. You're the chair of this committee. Thank you for doing that. Please vote yes. I'm in support of this. The more that this happens in every one of these states that I mentioned, the more likely it's going to be that they move forward. And once they pass out of committee, tens of thousands of people start hearing about it, and then you get pressure for a floor vote and moving forward in the process. The more that we take these small steps, the greater the chance we have of actually standing up and supporting liberty, despite what the federal government wants to do. And then if you don't live in any of these states, you can actually take the same approach. You look up your state legislator, your state representative, and state senator, and you literally just take a link to the bill that you like from one of the other states, and you can just email them, I think, in that situation, and say, hey, here's some legislation that's moving forward in Missouri, for example, or Nebraska, or in Alabama. Can you introduce this in our state? Because we need to stand up for the right to keep and bear arms today. Well, I think I'm definitely gone a little bit over here, but this is such important information. It makes me think, and I want to just quick rattle off a couple of quotes here that I think are really important in closing, and then I will look at the chat for questions and to my email for questions a little bit later today. Here's St. George Tucker in the first systematic commentary, the legal commentary on the Constitution that was ever done in 1803, and he put it this way: the right of self-defense is the first law of nature. It's not a constitutional right, it's a natural right. We have it by our birthright. And the great Mercy Otis Warren, writing as a Columbian patriot in the 1780s during the ratification debate, she said self-defense is the same thing. Years before St. George Tucker put it this way, this was a widely understood principle. She said self-defense is a primary law of nature which no subsequent... Oh man, I got to read that again. This is too good. Self-defense is a primary law of nature which no subsequent law of society can abolish. Again, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. I hope it motivates you to take action in support of the right to keep and bear arms on a state. You can do the same kind of thing on a local level, but we'll see how that plays out. I hope that motivates you to do stuff. I really appreciate being here. Help me spread the word and get this information out to more people by taking some easy actions that trigger the algorithm of the platforms you watch or listen on. A review on Apple Podcast is huge. I'm very grateful for those. I mean, it's cool to see good reviews and that people like it, but more so, I want to get this information out to people. So the more that you leave reviews on Apple Podcasts or any other podcast platform, the more that the platform will show the program to more people. Same with YouTube, Facebook, etc. Likes, comments, shares, subscribe, bell notifications, all that stuff helps spread the word, and thank you so much for that. And of course, if you want to put your financial faith behind our work, please don't feel any obligation to do so, but if you can come up with a couple of bucks a month, $2 a month is the minimum where it starts out, you can support us and we make it go a long, long way in support of the Constitution and liberty. That's 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Again, thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the show. I'll see you on Friday here at the Path to Liberty.